Well, hello everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Elaine for making it possible this conference, and of course, Alan and everybody else who worked on it, Prakash, and particularly Elaine and Prakash for inviting me down here. It was a very last minute thing, but we made it happen. So, can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Yes.
Should I just speak? Right. So, I don't know if I have a clicker or wave my hand. What's the metaphor?
Here.
Right.
Thank you.
While you're waiting for that, very interesting discussions during the day today about all these special zones and SARS and all of that. And so I think what I'll be talking about now will probably give you some an understanding of where we stand globally on the whole idea of cryptocurrencies and Web3 innovations, and not just. Okay. Is this? Magic. So, let's take a look at what happens. And just to give you some context, apart from the fact that I like hats, I also have obviously many hats. And I am on the Finland's National Metaverse Strategy Board, but I'm also in the World Economic Forum, in the Forum State Council, I work with the European Commission, Interpol, there's a whole bunch of different things. But we're going to focus this one on what governments are doing, what Finland is doing, but also globally what's going on in the world of blockchain, Web3 innovations and cryptocurrencies today, to give an example, to sort of set, where we are compared to where we want to go. And we heard some amazing presentations on where we can go. So first of all, and I think this is important to say, is that this feeling of doom and gloom that there's a bear market and Web3 is not important anymore, crypto's dead, this is nonsense, right? For those of us who are involved in the funding side of things, the investment side of things, on how projects are happening, it is actually booming in terms of, it's just not very apparent. There's a lot of dry powder. $27.1 billion has not been deployed in the last 18 months. So that's $27 billion from VCs to be deployed in the next 18 months. So you can just figure out the opportunity there. But overall, in spite of the sort of slowdown, there's a bullish sentiment around Web3 in general. Last year, 16 to 18 billion in 2022, right? So that's a lot of money that was invested. And then you had, and it's not just in one area. So it's not just about NFTs. It's not just about infrastructure. You have DeFi has obviously benefited from that, and the gaming sector, but also centralized savings, etc. Right? So there is money, and money is being deployed, and innovation is happening. So that I think is the first step. Because if that wasn't happening, trust me, no government would care. No government wants to legislate or create regulation for something that doesn't matter. So this slide is super important to explain the fact that the reason why governments are legislating is because it does matter. And it will matter even more as we go into the next half of this decade. Okay. Do you mind? Thank you. So that, in a nutshell, is the start of investment that happened in H1 2022, and the figures in H2 2022 are not radically different because, of course, Mr. Sam Bankman, changed the world, so to speak, in terms of everybody saying, "Hold on, let's wait and watch what happens." So the figures from H1 are actually more relevant, and what you can see, what I want to point out to all of us here is that it's Asia, and when you say Asia, it's Asia, Southeast Pacific Asia, as well as Northeast and Southeast Asia. It's all of Asia that actually overrides Europe in terms of what the sort of investment is looking at. And a lot of that is going to Web3. So the momentum is here in this region, right? And you can see that from the dynamism of the region and from the different activities that are taking place. Next slide, please. Oh, you got it. No, thank you. So the key growth indicators, of course, institutional funds, retail investors, we have both of them in this room, Main Street retail, but clearly government support is super important. And you will see that today, for example, in the US, where the talk about the slide next on, the difference between government support compared to some other places have made a huge difference in terms of where the money is flowing and where people are going. So why are we talking about special administrative zones and FTZs and SEZs? Because people with innovative ideas and capital want to move to places where the government or the environment supports the deployment of that without barriers. Right? That's why all of that is important. So now let's look at what's happening around the world. So we'll start with the US. We can't say that Bitcoin was invented in the US. We can't obviously say that. But the US was at the forefront of the crypto movement earlier on. And today, we have a fragmented scenario. So different governments, different state level initiatives aimed at kind of regulating or regulating. Wisconsin, for example, you have a bank where you can store your crypto, right? Nebraska as well. But on the national level, we have a guy who, can barely operate a mouse, and he doesn't know what security means, but he heads up the securities exchange regulation. So we've got both sides of this, right? And we've got some people in the Congress who barely can walk unaided, but they're telling you what money you should have in your pocket, right? It's the same. But that's the situation in the US right now. So overall, the picture's mixed. So I wouldn't bet on that as being a driver of growth in the crypto space in the next few years. South America is picking up. Brazil, we talked about some other countries as well, and Central South America. And this is a growth area, I think. There's much more to be done. But, yeah, and El Salvador obviously has set the threshold and sort of like the work we need to do. But overall, I think the institutional framework there is not as strong as in some other places, and therefore that affects how crypto regulation is taking place in South America at the moment. So it is an area to look out for, to keep a close eye on, but it's not there yet overall. Europe is very interesting because Europe obviously passed the MiCA, the Markets and Crypto Regulation, right? Act. I've been involved with that with my friends in the Parliament and the Commission. I would say it's work in progress. This is the first step. MiCA has to evolve to another level. But essentially today, you have an act in Europe which will be implemented in 2024, which means that a market will be created. A market-making act has happened. So we might not agree with all aspects of the act, and it does give a certain bias in terms of supporting non-custodial wallets. Self-custody is actually being supported, whereas exchanges will have more regulation, will have to check for many things. NFTs are kind of exempt, but you have to define what an NFT is in a specific way. And asset-backed tokens, utility tokens are obviously useful and are supported. So it's going to set the market and it's going to actually allow a lot of capital to flow. So started a bit late here. I was very cautious about all of this, but the MiCA or the MiCA, whichever way you pronounce it, it is actually, I would say, as important as GDPR was in the world of privacy, because it will be copied, it will be looked at as a standard, and it's going to go into implementation much faster than the others. But of course, UK is no longer in Europe, and so we decided to go there first. And so our act called the UK Travel Rules for Crypto gets implemented in 4 days' time, on the 1st of September, 2023. So for anybody who doesn't know that, or has a UK-based wallet, custodial wallet, or uses an exchange, as of 1st of September 2023, there will be KYC. So any exchange that facilitates a crypto transaction will have to look at both the data of the originator and the beneficiary and exchange that at the same time of the transaction, store it and make it available for AML and other regulatory concerns. So it's like a bank transaction, essentially. And plus there's a timeout clause. If you sell crypto to somebody, within 14 days, they can give it back to you and you have to pay them back, for example, right, in general. This is being set up by an organization that you haven't heard of, but you will hear of that. It's called FATF, okay? Financial Action Task Force. They are global, they are pretty powerful, and already 35 jurisdictions around the world have implemented FATF rules, including the next one, and about 150 jurisdictions are looking at doing that. FATF is the new, you can call it the global SEC, but it's got regulation, it goes beyond just regulation. It can actually implement subnational screen to etc. Right? So the UK is implementing this quite fast. I think we haven't talked through it well enough. We just wanted to be ahead of the gate 6 months before the EU. I think that was the driving driving force behind that. And so this act is going to always get pushed back on, and we'll have a new government in about 2 years' time. It will not be the same party. So we will have a change in the outlook in how we do regulation. So I would bet on MICA more than you. Let's move to we saw some UAE, so obviously the IFC is there. Now we have the digital regulation, assets regulation in the UAE, which is quite interesting. I would say again, it's work in progress. The idea there is to encourage inward investment, but I think as the adoption grows, we will see some changes in there. So it's also not something new. If you look at China, obviously nothing. I'm talking purely about the mainland, not really about Hong Kong. We've heard about Hong Kong before, but on the mainland, it has been technically illegal, but technically frozen. I mean, it's illegal. You can still hold cryptocurrencies, and you can still trade outside exchanges through ABC. You can't do it inside, and exchanges outside can't provide services inside. But technically, it's sort of frozen, and so we'll see how that goes. It hasn't worked out the way the government wanted it to, so I think there's going to be some changes there. Russia, first of all, said won't do it. Now they're saying they will do it. Obviously, they need more liquidity in there, but I wouldn't bet on that either. What's very interesting is what happened in Singapore, which is obviously one of the most developed markets in the region. And the Monetary Authority has said no crypto, but yes to blockchain. Obviously, there are people like Prakash here to talk about it. And but I wouldn't bet on that changing anytime soon. I think I think that's going to be their direction, because again, Singapore is affected by FATF, and they don't want to be on the grey list of currency manipulators. That's a pretty serious list to be on. Other countries on that list include people like North Korea, so you don't want to be on the same list as that. So I think for Singapore, monetary stability, regulatory compliance is more important than allowing cryptocurrency. But they will support blockchain, and the MAS has just announced a new fund on attracting blockchain startups. India, the government tried to do something. It didn't really work out exactly the way they wanted that. The Supreme Court pushed back and said, no, banks have to support fiat to crypto conversions to some degree. I think in India, India has always been worried about what we call capital controls, but it's really about capital flight, conversion to dollars, essentially. And which is strange, because actually a lot of money from India is actually in Dubai, in dirhams, and not in anymore. But that is a overriding concern, and so I think it's not a place where you would necessarily set up your next exchange or your next crypto company. South Korea, I think, has been doing pretty interesting things there. They moved into mandating security certification. However, there was a pushback on that, and the Korea blockchain week starts tomorrow. It's an interesting market to look at. I will keep an eye open on that. And then Australia, obviously expecting the consultation is finished now, and now they're coming up with a law. So this gives you, and I think I have probably no more time left. This gives you an overview of where we stand globally today in terms of crypto regulations and regulations for blockchain regulation in general.
Thank you, Kumar. That was a very thorough talk, and then I am sure that a lot of the government officials and the community here definitely were interested in learning what other countries do. So, anybody has questions for Kumar?
Yeah.
Yes.
So speaking of all the governments, so speaking of all the different governments. So speaking of all the different governments, Mr. Chatterjee, I wonder how you perceive the overall outlook of the governments of small countries compared to the large ones?
Excellent question. I didn't get your name. Do you want to introduce yourself? You want to introduce yourself? Like, we didn't get your name.
Oh, my name is Yeltsin.
So, Yeltsin, thank you very much for that question. It's an excellent question, and I think it's the crux of where all this is going. I feel right now we have two types of governments, so to speak, categories in the crypto world when it comes to the blockchain, Web3 world innovations. You've got the more established nations, the larger nations, which are worried about the impact of crypto and blockchain more as a disruptor for the financial side of things. They're finally generating jobs and generating companies and GDP, but they don't want the financial infrastructure of the banks disrupted. And the US is leading that effect by trying to do enforcement through, trying to do regulation by enforcement, which is always a bad idea. And UK is also sort of following suit, EU sort of in the middle ground. But I think overall, if you look at the West in general, there and the North in general, I think the attitude is more like this is a risk rather than this is an innovation. Okay, so this is still where we are overall. The smaller nations, I think, have understood that this can be a game changer. And it you don't have to be necessarily Singapore, or you don't have to be necessarily Taiwan or Hong Kong. You don't have to necessarily be in the top 20 or the top 50 economies list to be able to make a significant difference to your local economy and to your trade balance by allowing for blockchain and crypto innovation to happen. And I think in general, what I'm seeing globally is a lot more openness. So if I go to a number of different forums where this discussion is happening, you will see smaller states saying, hey, we want to attract crypto and blockchain entrepreneurs, and we want to make things available and possible for them to do, and also live in our countries and generate that jobs and growth. And I think that's actually the right approach. And I would bet on smaller countries at the next frontier of crypto and blockchain based growth, and not so much on the older established nations. Thank you.
That is excellent. Thank you so much.
So we still can have one more question before we have an open mic section for all the Palawan community to give feedback for the first day. So just one more question.
Yes, yeah.
Right here. Hi. Go ahead. I'm Joe John. The question is, you mentioned something about a regulatory body called FAT, sort of like an SEC. How is that body made up? Was it like our SEC, which is, okay, all right, how was it made up?
So, John, a great question. FATF is the Financial Action Task Force. I think the best way to answer how they're made up, have looked at their website, is very comprehensive. But essentially, think of it as a global cooperative body like Interpol, which allows national authorities to come together and define AML, KYC, but more importantly, monitoring and tracking rules that are then implemented globally. So you can actually track. So this is for most transactions in the world. I mean, you're looking at 90% of transactions are typically within a particular domain. So EU transactions in the EU, they follow SEPA rules. In SEPA, everything is recorded in SEPA. For example, UK has UK faster payment system, but again, everything's recorded, right? US has multiple systems to record, and the banks keep even digital paper records in some cases, community banks, right? But when you go global and you're looking at a transaction with the originator in 2 or 4 countries and a beneficiary across 2 or 3 jurisdictions, then you need to have global tracking. And that is not in place yet. And so FATF is essentially set up as a task force to create that global infrastructure, which means that if you exchange Bitcoin with somebody here, we'll track it all the way to their home country and to whichever tax jurisdictions. I can tell you they're far away from there at the moment, and they're pushing for it, but it's voluntary. So nations don't have to adopt. It's not an even backed mandate. So there's no nations don't really have to do that. But ultimately, I think it will become the center for a lot of the digital asset tracking and monitoring for AML and for KYC uses.
Thank you, Kumar.